So, I have no script for this video. Generally speaking, when I make these impressions videos, I at least have some kind of like an outline that like tells me kind of what I want to talk about over the course of the video. I don't have that today, like at all. So this is going to be particularly rambly and annoying, but if you want to just listen to it like a podcast, you're more than welcome. Obviously, Tears of the Kingdom has been out for a week now, and I've been playing the shit out of it, so I wanted to just make a video that just talks about what my thoughts are so far, specifically because Zelda's a very important game series to me, and I really care about the direction it goes and what the games are like. In order to talk about Tears of the Kingdom, however, since it's kind of a sequel, I need to talk about Breath of the Wild first. Way back when I first had the idea to make this analysis channel, there was initially a different idea that was going to happen. Dragon and his cousin were going to start an analysis channel, and I was going to occasionally guest star and do episodes there of my own shit, and it was going to be a joint channel that we all ran together. That didn't end up happening because they ended up not going with their idea, so I started my own channel instead because I liked the idea of starting an analysis channel. Specifically because I had really fun writing a script, and that script was about Breath of the Wild. I never ended up posting it to this channel specifically because I was going to need to capture a lot more footage than I wanted to, and my capture card sucks, and I ended up ultimately deciding to go in a slightly different direction with the analysis, one that was more story focused, because the original idea of this old analysis channel was that it was called Overthink Inc., and it was going to be about people pedantically pulling video games apart. Obviously, this channel is more about story analysis, which is much more in my wheelhouse. But that original script still stands, and I still have a lot of thoughts about Breath of the Wild. And in order to talk about Tears of the Kingdom, because it's so similar to Breath of the Wild, is really to talk about the changes that it made to what Breath of the Wild was. So, that being said, the first half of this video is going to be about Breath of the Wild, and I'm going to be showing some footage from the tutorial area of that game, just in the background. It's not really going to have anything to do with what I'm talking about, but it's just something to look at that's pretty, if you would like. If not, just fucking do some work or drive around in your car and listen to this, I don't know. And then the second half is going to be about Tears of the Kingdom and what it did, and what it fixed, and what I liked about it, and what I don't like about it, and blah, blah, blah. So that being said, I'm just going to come right out and say that obviously Breath of the Wild is a very good game, but my opinion on it is this. Breath of the Wild is a very good, solid 9 out of 10 game. It's not a good Zelda game. Sorry. I've been playing Zelda games for years. First game I ever played when I was about 7 years old was Ocarina of Time on an old Nintendo 64 my uncle bought me for Christmas. It scared the ever-living shit out of me, and my mom really didn't want me to use it anymore, but I did anyway. So Zelda is very important to me, and I've been playing Zelda games for a very long time. So I know what makes a good Zelda game. And unfortunately, Breath of the Wild is not one. Now, keep in mind, the formula could not stay the way it was before. Like, there's no way. Like, the Skyward Sword is a gimmicky piece of crap. We all know it. All right? Okay, can we all agree on that? Skyward Sword sucked. And it really did need to change. And I honestly, like, big cojones for Nintendo for committing to making change and making a game so radically different from any other Zelda game that it basically started an entirely new genre of open world game. Like, now we're seeing Breath of the Wild clones. Obviously, Elden Ring is, like, an almost better version of Breath of the Wild, and I think Tears of the Kingdom ended up taking some inspiration in turn from Elden Ring. And, you know, Genshin Impact, obviously, is another one. The problem is that they went too far in their commitment of reinventing Zelda, to the extent that they removed a lot of the things that I think at least fundamentally make a Zelda game. And so I want to talk about those things and why I think Breath of the Wild didn't do them well. And then we're going to move on to Tears of the Kingdom and what Tears of the Kingdom fixed about that and what it didn't and blah, blah, blah. Suffice it to say, before I begin, I'm going to be ripping into Breath of the Wild. Like most people who write video essays on Breath of the Wild. I love Breath of the Wild. It's a great fucking game. It's got a lot of issues, specifically in terms of what makes it a Zelda game. So there are 3 things that I went into Tears of the Kingdom honestly hoping they would fix. I have a lot more issues with Breath of the Wild. Not a huge fan of the shrines. Obviously the weapon durability is but there's 3 big issues that I really hoped they would actually fix and that I realistically thought they could fix. Number 1 was the story. Breath of the Wild story is nothing. It's literally nothing. It's the most boring fucking milquetoast, like nothing story I've ever seen in my life. The only bits of it that are fun are Zelda. Ironically enough, considering she's usually the most boring part of a Zelda game. I hoped they would fix the enemy variety, and I hoped they would fix the dungeons. So let's go into all of that and talk about that a little bit. So first of all, the story. A lot of the issues with Breath of the Wild story come from the fact that it was trying to be too non-linear to have a really good story. It was trying to harken back to the days of, ye old days of OG Zelda, where you could kind of do anything in any order. But the problem is that back then games didn't really have stories. Like Link was like, you are like the whole plot of the first Zelda game is you are a boy, go on adventure, maybe take sword. like there's nothing there. Like there's really nothing there. But video games aren't like that anymore, and I'd say for the better. I mean, I play games primarily for the atmosphere and the story. Like a good gameplay loop can get me hooked, don't get me wrong. And even though Hollow Knight is a joy to play, mostly, if it had a different aesthetic, if it wasn't so like strikingly atmospheric and strikingly interesting and mysterious to figure out all the story and all the shit, I definitely wouldn't be as into it. That's why I'm not into Celeste. Because it's way more focused on tough gameplay. Regardless, getting off track. Breath of the Wild story is incredibly milquetoast and incredibly boring. The mediocre voice acting really doesn't help with that. I can say I'm not a professional voice actor, but as someone who has spent a lot of time and a lot of years voice acting and directing voice actors, Breath of the Wild's voice acting reeks to me of nothing direction. I don't think it's necessarily a problem with the voice actors themselves. I don't think that they necessarily are bad voice actors. They mostly all just sound very lost. And like they don't really know how to deliver their lines. And my hunch is that it's a problem with the directing. Can't confirm that. I have no way to confirm that. A lot of the voice actors have done nothing. Like, of the 8 voice actors, only 3 of them had really had substantial careers. That was Elizabeth Maxwell, Sean Chiplock, and the guy who played the King of Hyrule, and I can't remember his name, and he did not do a good job. But basically everybody else hadn't really done a lot, which is weird to put in your flagship series. Anyway, regardless, that was part of the reason. But a lot of the reason was that you couldn't really have a lot of a story because the player could find most of the story in any order, and in order to have a coherent story, you'd need to sacrifice some of that non-linearity that Nintendo was going so hard for. The problem is that Nintendo tried to do like this weird compromise, because Zelda games are kind of known for their stories at this point. Their high amount of story content, whether for bad or for worse. So they couldn't just not have a story, but usually stories, like intense stories in video games, usually work out way better when your game is linear, just because then your player can experience the story as you intended it to, and they don't miss anything. So Breath of the Wild really struggled to have a good story in that regard. And I think there was one primary way they could have like rectified that, thinking back on it now. This wasn't even in my original script, but the way they could have rectified it is by leaning into the weird side stories that Zelda is also known for. Like Zelda games, particularly Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, those games are known for their weird-ass side characters. Like, there's a moment in the Tears of the Kingdom stream that I recently did that I'm taking footage for this video from. There's a moment where I list about 20 different weird Twilight Princess side characters just off the top of my head, and going back and listening to it now, I missed some. Like, there is a substantial amount of characters that I missed, and I spent like 2 minutes just listing like 20 different side characters that had really interesting stories and really interesting quirks to them. And that's really the side of Zelda stories that I care about nowadays. Like, the main plots are usually like pretty vanilla. They're pretty bland. Like, Twilight Princess was interesting, Majora's Mask was interesting. Ocarina of Time is pretty normal story. Wind Waker is a pretty normal story. Skyward Sword is just ugh. But But I really care about the weird side characters because they're always so full of life and personality and weirdness, and I love them. And Breath of the Wild didn't really have a lot of that. I mean, there's Pura, and she's cool, and there's Robbie. I didn't really care for him, but he's there. Impa and Paya are interesting characters. Those are all Sheikah. And I'm not counting anybody who's involved in the main plot. Like, I'm not counting any of the Guardians or any of their descendants because they're main plot characters. I'm talking specifically weird side characters. There's Cass. I love Cass. Cass is amazing. I love him. I still haven't found him in Tears of the Kingdom if he's there, and I'm very sad about that. And that's really about it for characters that have, like, unique models and aren't, like, just another copy and paste villager. I guess there's the weird guy in Hateno who wants a girl to like him. I remember that. That's Kilton. Kilton, I guess. Kilton. I've spent way too long trying to think of Breath of the Wild side characters. There's not a lot of them. And that was something you could easily do. You could easily have stupid little side adventures that Link could go on and meet interesting characters, and they could be self-contained little stories that you can find as you will and complete them as you will, and then you wouldn't have this problem with, you know, your story getting in the way of your non-linear world. I'm going to talk about this later, obviously. But Breath of the Wild story was not great at all. Like, by any stretch of the word. So that was one thing that I wanted fixed. The second thing that I hoped that Tears of the Kingdom would rectify is the enemy variety. Breath of the Wild has Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos, who I consider pretty interchangeable because they all appear in groups together, and they all act basically the same way. Lizalfos kind of jump around and are even more annoying than Bokoblins and Moblins, but otherwise they all act the same. You've got Keese that go down in one hit. You've got Choo-Choos that mostly also go down in one hit. You've got Wizzrobes. And you've got Octoroks, I guess. And Guardians. And that's, like, it. Most of the variation within those groups is just color variations that have more health but don't really, like, interact with the player in any different sort of way. Which means that you're fighting a lot of fucking Bokoblins. I basically stopped doing combat encounters like a third of the way through the game because I'm like, I'm just gonna be fighting the same fucking group of Bokoblins over again, and I'm just gonna bash them until they die, and then I'm gonna get some weapons and some food, and that's gonna be it. So that was something that I was really, really hoping Tears of the Kingdom was going to fix. It was also the one I was most worried they weren't going to fix because from all the trailers I'd seen, they looked mostly like they had about the same number of enemies. It was mostly Bokoblins. They were mostly showing us Bokoblins, and I'm like, okay, cool. The thing I was most hoping that Tears of the Kingdom would fix is the dungeons. There's two things that Zelda's known for. Its story and its dungeons. Specifically, its puzzle-heavy, really complicated, interesting dungeons that are weird and aesthetically interesting. Breath of the Wild's dungeons were small as shit. They had one type of puzzle that they utilized over and over and over again, which was spatial reasoning via moving around the Guardians, which for me sucked because I have very little spatial reasoning. A lot of people said that the dungeons were way too easy. The first time through, I had to look up a walkthrough for every single one of them because my brain does not work in that way. And besides that, they've all had the exact same aesthetic design. They were all the same dungeon, just broken up into 4 different pieces. And that sucks. That sucks because Zelda is specifically known for its interesting dungeons. Like, let's take Twilight Princess as an example because unlike some people, I really like Twilight Princess. In Twilight Princess, you go through, a weird wood forest area with a bunch of monkeys. You go through an industrial mining complex. You go through a water temple. You go through a tomb. You go through a fucking mansion. You go through the city in the sky, whatever the fucking Twilight Realm is, and Hyrule Castle, and there's one or two others I'm missing in there. And there's one or two other like big cave systems that are like mini dungeons. And they're all varied, and they're all interesting, and they're all unique, and they all have unique mechanics. So like the forest temple kind of has like you having this like logistics problem where you have to find all these monkeys and you have to make sure they're in the right place so you can use them to jump over gaps and blah blah blah. In the Goron mines, you have to utilize your iron boots to magnetize yourself to surfaces and figure out, how to use these surfaces to get from one area to another. In the Yeti Mansion, you have a lot of problems with, like, getting certain objects to certain other places of the mansion. It's very different, interesting little problems that you have to solve in various different ways. You know, the tomb has you solving puzzles on the fly because you have this top and you've got to figure out, you know, like how to do things while you're moving at Mach 10 speeds. I like the top. I think people suck. I like the top. And it's interesting and it's varied and it gives you interesting different things to do. Breath of the Wild doesn't do that. Breath of the Wild has the same dungeon that you solve in the same way by solving 5 small puzzles that never build on each other and don't really have anything to do with each other. They all just exist in this space together. And then you fight the same boss that has mildly different mechanics, but really you can just brute force your way through them if you would like to. And that, you know, is a weird decision. Like a really weird decision, because your whole entire fan base is based on people who either really like the characters in the story or really like the dungeon content and the puzzle content in the dungeons. And to really fail at both of those things in a Zelda game is weird. And I didn't like that. I loved Breath of the Wild. I played the shit out of it. I played over 200 hours of the goddamn thing before I finally finished it. But like, that's what I mean when I say that it's a really good game, but it's not a good Zelda game. Basically. So, obviously, early footage of Tears of the Kingdom showed a lot of interesting stuff. I was very hopeful that it would fix a lot of the issues I had with Breath of the Wild. So, I've been playing Tears of the Kingdom for a week. What are my thoughts? You've probably all wanted to know desperately by this point. I'm sure no one is even fucking watching this video. Who the fuck cares what I think? But, from a layman who knows nothing about video game design, here are my thoughts that nobody needs to hear, but I'm going to say them anyway. First of all, the story. I mean, you can watch the stream to hear my reaction to that. Immediately, the story is better. Instead of just waking up in a shrine, Zelda saying, hey, come find me. And then an old man tells you, hey, go find her. There's some beasts. Go kill them. There's intrigue. You're going through these ruins of this ancient civilization. I specifically mentioned one thing in my original Breath of the Wild script that I think is very, very interesting in hindsight. I mentioned that over the past couple of years, kind of starting a little bit in Twilight Princess, but mostly kind of becoming a thing in Skyward Sword, Zelda kind of has this ancient civilization aesthetic that were technologically advanced, and they reuse this idea in many of their games. And it's weird because usually I'm totally into that kind of thing, but the way Zelda did it always bored me. And specifically, it always bored me because there's never enough context. Like, it's like, oh, the Ancient Ones built this, and now we're finding it again, and that's it. Like, we don't know who the Ancient Ones are. We never know anything about them. Like, nothing ever happens in that regard. It's just, ooh, the Ancient Ones. Okay, cool. What does that mean? The only place this was done well, I thought, was in Twilight Princess, when you see the city in the sky filled with these ukus, and you're like, there's no way these fucking guys built this. Did you guys devolve into these things? Like, what the, like, there's a little bit of, like, what the fuck involved with that area that, like, works. But, like, in Skyward Sword, I mean, to be fair, I haven't finished Skyward Sword, so maybe they go into a whole bunch of detail about it in the end. I don't know. From what I was aware of, they didn't really do anything with it. And Breath of the Wild really didn't do anything with it. It's like 10,000 years ago, there was this big war, and they got the Guardians, and now we have them. Okay, cool. Tears of the Kingdom immediately sets up, okay, here's this ancient civilization, right? They're called the Zonai. They look weird as shit, okay? There is this big imprisoning war. There was this huge demon king. Shit went down. Okay, cool. Are we good? All right, now we're going to awaken the demon king. Fuck you, go die. It's great. It sets up a mystery that needs to be solved. It sets up a quest. Find Zelda. Even if you haven't played Breath of the Wild, in just like the 20 seconds we get with Zelda, she has more character than most anybody in Breath of the Wild did in the entire run of the game. And also the voice acting is much better. Like, Zelda had one of the better performances of OG Breath of the Wild. But even here, you can tell that the direction was way better because she sounds much more confident in the way she speaks and the way she says things. And she does a fantastic job at portraying Zelda as this weird fucking nerd. And I love this version of Zelda. I really, really do. I think she's great. I love the fact that she's this weird fucking nerd. It really fits with the rest of the tone of this game, which is mystery solving and discovering ancient ruins. There's so many scientists and so many like explorers and archaeologists running around in Tears of the Kingdom's world, and personally that appeals to me because I don't think we get enough stories in general that are focused on that type of character, and I love it. I love it a lot. So there's intrigue set up. There's an immediate goal set up. And as you continue through the game, you get more and more questions. Zelda keeps appearing in areas. Why does she keep appearing? The answer, at least I have a pretty solid theory that she's the Sage of Time. This gets revealed in the first temple. Sorry, this is slight spoilers. I'm sure it's whatever temple you go to. I went to the Rito one because that's the one they kind of told me to go to. And I wanted to kind of follow their suggestions because I like doing that in games because I like to see the intended route because I feel like it's probably the most polished. But she's apparently the Sage of Time. Yeah, okay, so time travel. People keep asking if she's really Princess Zelda, though, and, like, the Great Fairy mentioned that, like, she didn't seem like Zelda, so that's a weird wrench in it, though, that makes it from becoming too obvious what's happened. There's still a form of memories in the form of geoglyphs, which are probably still going to be kind of boring and not super interesting, but I've only found one of them, so you never know. But you know, there's so much more going on in Tears of the Kingdom story. There's a whole new type of quests called side adventures, which aren't like side quests. Like Breath of the Wild side quests are mostly just find me a thing, bring me a thing, I'll give you a reward. Tears of the Kingdom actually has whole side adventures. There's this whole fucking subplot in Hateno where there's a mayoral election between this fashionista and this guy who's been farming the land for ages and is the current mayor. And it's interesting. You know, there's all these big ruins at Kakariko Village. There's changes that have happened there. Pai has become the chief, you know. She's really like instituted this, hey, people are coming to see these ruins. Let's make this a tourism thing. And, you know, there's this guy who's running around who's the head of the Zonai survey crew. I don't know much about him yet, but he's cute. And I want to know more about him. He seems like he's an extra motherfucker. And just the fact that, you know, like Pura is back and even better than before. She's got a new assistant who's super cute. And they're working on the chasm stuff. And that's fun. The chasms are fun. You know, there's so much more going on with Tears of the Kingdom story. There's so much more to explore and experience, in my opinion, because that's why I play games. Exploring Breath of the Wild is great. You see a lot of things, you do a lot of interesting things. Tears of the Kingdom is more about experiencing interesting things. At least that's my impression of it so far. Like, a lot more is going on under the hood in terms of its smaller stories that it's trying to tell, and I think they realized that that was how they were going to get more story into Tears of the Kingdom and keep people interested in stories. They were going to tell small stories that didn't really have much to do with the big plot, and that was going to be what was interesting. And it is. It's true. That's incredibly interesting. I'm having so much fun just running around. You know, I keep hearing rumors that Laurelland's been taken over by pirates, and I really want to go down there and see what's happening. But I also want to go back to the Korok Forest and see what's going on over there. There's just so much stuff that I'm so excited to go back and see what's going down and what's happening currently. And even with like the memory quest, like there's much more character involved with it. Impa is going around and finding these geoglyphs with you. It's not just you going around, oh, there's a memory spot. Okay. Hey, Pikango, where is it? Oh, it's over there. Okay, cool. Here's a memory. Ta-da, we're done. There's a lot more going on. There's a lot more mystery solving that all of the characters are up to. And all the other characters are much more involved with your quest. And your quest is much more about, you know, collaborating with other people. And I find that much more engaging than Breath of the Wild story. So, point goes to Tears of the Kingdom. It fixed one of the issues I was really hoping it would. Cool. Next is enemy variety. This is the one that I was certain was not going to be fixed. It was my hope, it was my dream, it was my prayer. I was like, please, please fix this. And I was like, but they're not going to fix it. They're not going to do it. Suffice it to say, I was pleasantly surprised. There's still less enemy variety than I'd like, but there's way more than there was in Breath of the Wild. We see the return of likes. There's like these things called Horriblins now. There's the constructs, which essentially kind of replace the guardians, but the constructs are more like enemies. The guardians, like the mini guardians that you found in the Divine Beast, were fucking pushovers. Like, they were nothing. Like, they didn't do anything. You could take one down in like 2 hits with a decent weapon. There's also these weird fucking hands that come out of the ground and like they're faster than you and they're horrifying. And, you know, the choo-choos actually have more health now. So they're actually like enemies and not just like obstacles. You can't just like kill them in one hit unless you have a good weapon. So yeah, there's, and I haven't even looked at a lot of the game's world. Like, I guarantee you there's more shit out there that I haven't found yet. And that excites me. That excites me that there's the hope now that there might be more enemies out there, more types of enemies out there. So yeah, so it's not the greatest. Like, it's not like it's Tears of the Kingdom, from what I've seen, still has a lower enemy variety than even fucking like Ocarina of Time did like 20 years ago, but it's better. It's better, and I was pleasantly surprised. So we're gonna leave it at that and say that at the very least there's enough enemy variety that I want to participate in combat encounters again. Not necessarily the Bokoblin ones. I still have to force myself to go fight them if I need a new weapon, because but the caves are interesting, and they've got a lot of fun shit going on in there. So this finally leads me to my final point, the dungeons. So with the dungeons, I'm going to talk about the actual dungeons, I'm going to talk about the cave systems, the chasms, and the shrines. I'm kind of disappointed the shrines came back. I was really, really hoping that they'd have a different method for you obtaining spirit orbs or heart pieces and stamina vessels, whatever. I talk about in my original Breath of the Wild video that I would have preferred if Breath of the Wild, and by extension Tears of the Kingdom, had a system where you just solved the puzzles that were in the shrines out in the world, and you got rewarded either a heart container or a stamina vessel for it. And those would build up into bigger things, and that would lead to less agency in how you develop your character, but ultimately everyone ends up in the same place, essentially, so it doesn't really matter, and it's a 50-50 shot. You get what you want. So it would have provided some sort of randomness, like what reward am I gonna get? Is it gonna, what is it gonna be? The shrines are really boring, because the shrines are just like the dungeons of Breath of the Wild. They're the exact same aesthetic. They are the exact same idea. They are so short that they cannot build off of themselves as far as puzzles go, for the most part. And they're just really boring and really easy to solve for the most part in Breath of the Wild. So I wish that Tears of the Kingdom hadn't brought them back. I wish that they'd found some other method for giving you more hearts and more stamina. However, the shrines at the very least are an improvement. Specifically because in Breath of the Wild, there was a small element of creativity. There were shrines that you could solve in different ways, but for the most part, there was one very obvious way you were supposed to solve the shrines. Tears of the Kingdom gives you a much expanded tool set, I'd say, a much broader tool set to use, specifically with the Ultra Hand ability. Most of the shrines revolve around the Ultra Hand ability. And that's for good reason, because there are, there's the intended solution, but there are a lot of times where I cheesed a puzzle by doing something else entirely, and the game let me, and it worked. And I don't think that, that still satisfied me. Some people might be dissatisfied that they used Ultra Hand and the rewind ability to cheese a puzzle, like I do sometimes. But I think that it satisfies me, at least, because I've been clever and I found an alternate solution. And I've done this in several different ways. In the build up to the airship, the Rito airship temple, I entirely forgot that I had the ascend power. So there were a couple times that I used Zonai device hot air balloons to entirely fly all the way up to the top of the big pillars, when I probably could have just used the ascend power, and I entirely forgot I had it. But I felt so proud of myself for all of the times I narrowly escaped death and I got to where I was trying to go with only my wits about me, my climbing ability, the Tulin's little gust, and my fucking Zonai devices that I almost goddamn ran out of because I used so many of them. I didn't have a single. I used all 3 of my rockets to get up there. And I felt really proud of myself for doing it that way. So the shrines are slightly improved. The shrines are more difficult now, for sure. I've spent much more time on the shrines than I did in Breath of the Wild. Mostly, I'd say on average, I spent probably about 5 to 10 minutes in each shrine in Breath of the Wild. I definitely spend probably about 15 to 20 minutes in any given Tears of the Kingdom shrine, which is an improvement. And the Tears of the Kingdom shrines, like the Breath of the Wild shrines, were often one puzzle and you were done. The Tears of the Kingdom shrines do build off of themselves. They show you a concept, they have you repeat the concept, and then they have you do it in a much more complicated way, generally speaking. And that's good puzzle design. They've finally done good puzzle design in the shrines, which is great, and I appreciate it. And they're better. I'd still prefer them to do it a different way, but they're better. The caves. I fucking adore the caves. I'm so glad that they have caves. And even if the caves all kind of look a little bit the same, they're just fun. You just get to bash through rocks and you get to go through interesting areas. You know, you can find a well in a village, and like I remember specifically in Breath of the Wild, seeing wells and going, "Oh, is there something down there?" It's just the ground. There's nothing there. But now in Tears of the Kingdom, you can look at a well and go, "Oh shit, there's something down there!" And you can go down there and you can go see it, and it's so fucking cool. And I just love finding these little mini areas just hidden in the world. It's just, oh, it just makes me happy. And even if I find the same things, even if I find a couple enemies and some rocks, you know what? It makes me happy that they're there, that there's some variety, that I can find a cave and go, "Ooh, I wonder what's in there." And there might be something cool in there. Sometimes there's cool shit in the caves. It's cool. I love it. It's cool. And that leads us to the dungeons. So this section is going to be much more uninformed because I've only done one of them so far. I've only done the Rito airship. So everything I say here could be entirely untrue. But here are my impressions. Again, like the shrines, it's better. It's definitely better. I have the feeling that each of the dungeons are going to have a different aesthetic. I could be wrong about that. They could all, again, be an airship, entirely the same. And there's the same boss at the end that has a different color palette. That could be the case. I don't think so. From what I've read online, from what other people have said, I do not think that is the case. I think they are all different. So that's good. My problem is that they're still not Zelda dungeons. They still reuse that concept of find the 5 things and activate them through smaller puzzles. Now, those puzzles are a little more involved this time around. 1 or 2 area navigations can build off of each other, and you can find the things you're supposed to find through multiple puzzles, but they're still not great. The dungeons are still really small, and they still don't have that Zelda building off of itself, building off of its puzzles, culminating in a big epic final encounter like the old games do. And it sucks, and I miss them. Please bring them back to me. Where are my children? Please bring me back the fucking Shadow Temple. Where is my child? I know you have him. But that depends on what you count as the dungeon. If you just count the airship, it's still pretty pathetic. I'm not gonna lie. However, if you count the huge build up to getting to the airship as part of the dungeon, I'd say they're pretty good. I'd say that's not bad. That shit took me like 45 fucking minutes to get through. And I had so much fun navigating to this goddamn airship. Like, you don't even know. It was fun. I was grinning from ear to ear. I was having the time of my life. Dragon was next to me. He was going, "What the fuck are you doing over there?" Like, it was great. I loved that build up. And it carried the rest of the dungeon for me. And to be fair, the dungeon design was better. There were different sorts of puzzles that you had to solve to get to the things that you were supposed to get to, and they were much more interesting. They weren't necessarily much harder. I did not need to look at a walkthrough for the Wind Temple at all. But they were much more interesting and much more engaging, and I felt very clever when I solved them. I also love the fucking wind sails. Those are fucking fun to jump off of. Hell yeah. I like Tears of the Kingdom's stronger commitment to using your traversal powers in puzzles, because Breath of the Wild really actually didn't do that a lot. If they did, they were very obvious, simple solutions, like use the ice pillar to make an ice pillar and go on the ice pillar to go to a thing. or use your wind glider to glide in a specific pattern. But they have much more complicated traversal puzzles and platforming sections in Tears of the Kingdom, and I really, really like that because traversing in these games is fucking fun. And so having to solve puzzles while you're traversing is even more fucking fun. It's great. It's so tension-filled. I love it. Now that being said, I don't know if there's just these 4 temples in the game. I don't know what else the game has in store. It could have more, for all I know. There could be a whole other set of dungeons after that. There could be a huge hidden classic Zelda dungeon hidden somewhere in the world that I have no fucking idea exists. I don't think there is one, but you never know. The Yiga clan hideout did exist in Breath of the Wild, so you never fucking know. But I'm mixed about the dungeons. They're better. They're still not great. They're better. They're still not great. Yeah. So essentially, yeah, so far those are my impressions. Again, I'm not as far as most people are who've already bought the game. I haven't spent the whole week just playing it, nothing else, because unfortunately I have a life. I'm trying to edit videos. I have shit I gotta do. I have work to go to. You know, I have a life. Alas. But I'm very excited to play more. I'm very curious how my opinions will change as I continue through the game. And yeah, take everything I said here with a grain of salt. This isn't like a full review of Tears of the Kingdom. This is just my thoughts from my first, like, probably 15 hours. I think I've probably played it 15 hours. That's probably what I've got. So yeah. So yeah, that's the video. That's the video. Thank you so much for joining me. And I will see you very soon. I have a couple of videos on the roster. I need my editor to get back here from vacation and get off his butt to do it. So I have one video planned, and I have another video that I'm editing currently. So you should see that one hopefully in the next month. That one's a little bit shorter, but it will be fun. Small break from Higurashi, but I think it'll be fun. So that being said, thank you all for joining me for this video, and I hope to see you all soon. Farewell. Have a very good day.